Without further ado, I wanted to bring up Dr. Poul Sorensen, who we gave $1.2 million to last year, at the beginning of 2016, to work on some pediatric brain cancer research. So thank you for the work you do, and got about 5-10 minutes with us. So.
Actually, thank you for the work you do, because without that, it would be really hard to do the kind of things I'm going to be talking about in a few minutes. Last time I came to speak to you was actually, I think, a couple of years ago, when we had just gotten the grant, so I just wanted to give you a little bit of an update. Last time I came, I got all dolled up with a suit and tie, and I felt like an idiot, so this time, if there's any kids out there, this is what scientists wear when they go to work, so that's one of the good things. Sometimes we wear a lab coat, especially when we're having lunch, so we don't spill all over our clothes. But we got a grant from you guys and from the Canadian Cancer Society to study pediatric and adult brain cancers and other neural tumors. And one of the things that your money has done for us is it's allowed us to do research that's a little bit out of the box. In other words, when you write a grant and you have to keep certain projects going, most of the granting agencies are really pretty conservative. So they almost want you to do stuff that you've already almost completed, right? And the problem with that is that you're not going to change the world that way. You're going to do what you've already predicted you can do, rather than reach out and do something that can really shake up the way we think about things. And so that's why I really love this funding mechanism, because it gives us kind of artistic or scientific license to do interesting things. Lots of scientists have lots of great ideas, but the problem is that if you have to sort of stay within certain constraints, because you have to report back to your granting agency, then you tend to be, less crazy about the types of things you do, and likely, not all the time, but likely you may have less impact in the stuff you do. It fits very nicely into articles that you can publish and fatten up your resume and get your promotion to professor and all that sort of stuff, but that doesn't really help the patient, does it? That just helps, the scientific community. So what I really love about what's been going on with the money that you've raised in the Canadian Cancer Society is that we've kind of reached out and done some very different things with this grant, and we're getting some really excellent success. The other good thing about it is that it's a 5-year grant. A lot of grants are 3 years, so you kind of get into it for 2 years and you start panicking that you need to get it renewed, because you've got people on the payroll. You've got students that may have come over from Germany or from Japan or from China or wherever that are depending on you to raise money so that they can keep doing the work that they're doing. So with a 5-year grant, you can ask bolder questions. And so what we set out to do in this grant was to follow up on an observation we had just before we got the grant. And that is that there's a certain protein, and it's called EF2K. I can tell you why we called it that, but that's a little bit boring. I'll just cut to the chase and tell you that we found something very interesting out. We found that tumor cells, and particularly neural tumor cells, need this protein to survive when the going gets tough. So in other words, when tumors start to run out of oxygen, or glucose, or other nutrients, goodies that all cells need to take in order to survive, they activate this enzyme in order to activate a process called metabolism, which is a way to get energy out of food and oxygen. And so what we found, particularly in neural tumors, in medulloblastoma, which is a devastating pediatric malignancy, and glioblastoma multiforme, which is an adult tumor, we found that they crank up the levels of this enzyme so that if the tumor cells start to run out of energy, then they find a way to get around that, because this protein somehow, and I'll get to that in a minute, somehow rewires the way the cells get their energy. So even if normal cells can't do this, then the tumor cells, by having higher levels of this enzyme, can take advantage of other types of nutrients. And so what we set out to do was to figure out what's going on. How do tumor cells do this? And we haven't published this yet, so no one's allowed to tell any of their scientist geek friends about this, okay? It's classified information. The waiver forms are in the back. What we figured...
It's okay, Trump just tweeted it out.
Okay. Well, then no one will believe it. So, what we found out is that under conditions that might otherwise lead the tumor cells to survive, they crank up this enzyme and they start using, instead of glucose, they start using fats to make energy. So they pull fats out of the circulation, somehow get it into the cell, and they start using fats. And this is very interesting because that's a blockable process, right? This is something that we can sprinkle drugs on the cells and block, okay? So this is very important because if you can combine a way to starve tumors and then take away their ability to adapt to that, then it's a completely different way to treat tumors rather than terrible chemotherapy and radiation that kills all sorts of normal cells. There seems to be a particular dependency of the tumor cells on this pathway. So if we can take that away, we can spare normal cells, right? And so that's what this is all about, because you all know that if you treat a pediatric patient with a brain tumor, chemotherapy and radiation, it will have potentially devastating effects to all the other brain tissues. And it will have devastating effects on intellectual, physical, and emotional development. We have to do better than that. And so what I really like about this is that this is a way to manipulate, if you will, physiology. Rather than noxious chemicals that some pharmaceutical company makes, this is a way to manipulate normal physiology to our advantage, right? So the toxicity around that is minimized, and it's completely different than, you know, giving the patient horrible drugs that we don't even know how they work. So we're really excited about this. And this is something that, as I said, we could only do because we're given sort of carte blanche to do, you know, out-of-the-box stuff. Very exciting. And we actually just published a paper 2 days ago. We haven't disclosed this particular mechanism, but we showed that in another neural tumor, so like I said, we started this with medulloblastoma and adult gliomas, but there's another tumor called neuroblastoma, which is also a neural tumor, but it occurs in the adrenal glands. There's neural tissue in the adrenal glands, which sit above the kidneys, that senses kind of the hormonal milieu of the body. And this is neural tissue, but it's not in the central nervous system. So we kind of figured maybe these tumors also are dependent on this enzyme for the same adaptation to low nutrient availability or starvation. And sure enough, they do. So what we did is we took, so neuroblastoma is a tumor typically seen in extremely young kids, less than 2 years old. And if they have certain molecular characteristics, it's devastating. The cure rate is 40% in some of these kids. And you know, these are 1 to 2-year-olds. You can't give them chemo and radiation and not expect horrible side effects. So we reckon, what if the same process is going on in these tumors? And sure enough, they are. So we used an artificial system in which we implanted tumor cells in a mouse model. We have to do some mouse modeling. Sorry to say it, but we have to do this to prove this. We implanted these neuroblastoma human cells in a mouse model and decreased the calories in the food that the mice got, not in a way that the mice were starving, but just by lowering the caloric content by 30%. That's not a whole lot. You know, when you're riding from Kelowna to Vancouver, you're probably at 30% of your normal caloric levels in your blood, right? Because you're churning over. So we did that, and then we knocked out this enzyme, and these tumors just melted away, okay? So this is real proof that this works, okay? We didn't give them drugs. We genetically turned off this enzyme. And, you know, I'm a pathologist. I know how to look at tissues, and I looked at these tissues, and I was amazed. The tumors had died. They were wiped out. They had undergone something called necrosis. And the normal tissues looked normal. There was no effect on them. So we're super excited about this. So that's an example of, you know, while you're, you know, I've done the Ride to Conquer Cancer before, which is a different deal. I know it's not as long as what you guys are doing, but when you're, you know, going up that 1,000th hill, you know, thinking there can't be that many hills, then just kind of think about, you know, not the stuff I'm telling you about, but what other scientists are kind of given the license to do, you know, by having this sort of freedom. Let me give you another example. So that's within the tumor realm, and so I've told you about tumor cells reprogramming their metabolism to use fats. I've told you that in neuroblastoma, and very likely in medulloblastoma and other brain tumors, they, if you calorically restrict the patient, plus you take out this enzyme, you can selectively kill tumor cells. I've told you about that. And we've actually got a collaboration going now with a pharmaceutical company that we just signed a collaborative deal. Believe me, I'm not going to make any money on it, but it's a way for them to provide us drug to see if, you know, because they don't know the science around this. So basically, they make a drug because, you know, I know these guys and they know the work we're doing, and so because of some of the early work that I told you about, they went out, they've made some agents that target this enzyme. So we're going to try this sort of in mouse modeling studies to see if it works. But, so that's all related to brain tumor work. But the other thing we decided to do was, again, because we have some, you know, artistic license to do stuff, we asked, where else might this enzyme be active? What other types of diseases, neural diseases, might this enzyme be active in? So I had the fortune to have a student join me from a neurosciences background, so not a tumor biology background, but a guy that did work on Huntington disease and Alzheimer's disease and Parkinson's. And so he wanted to come to the lab to study whether or not this particular pathway, this EF2K pathway, that's funded by the grant, might also be important in Alzheimer's disease. And so indeed it is. So it turns out that this enzyme is also activated by something called A-beta, which is these small pieces of protein that are implicated in Alzheimer's disease. And so what happens with these small pieces is they bind to neurons and they create toxicity in the neurons. And that's in large part what people believe is going on in Alzheimer's disease. And it turns out that in order for these protein pieces to be toxic, they need this enzyme that I'm talking about. Because if the enzyme is there, the protein pieces kill the neurons, okay, or it's highly toxic to the neurons. But we then did the same thing. We genetically inactivated the enzyme, and all of a sudden, these small protein pieces, their toxicity goes away by 95%. Okay, and this is just, you know, in the Petri plate. So then I have a colleague at UBC that works on worms. Okay, I mean, scientists are a little bit strange. Some work with worms, you know, some work with sheep. I don't know. Some work with cells and Petri plates. This guy works with worms. And he has a worm model of Alzheimer's disease. I have no idea how you measure the cognitive ability of a worm. Maybe you could switch in Trump or something. Don't get me going. But, so we genetically inactivated, so he has a readout for Alzheimer's disease in these worms. Basically, it's their ability to crawl to food, okay? And the Alzheimer's worms crawl very poorly to food. If we knocked out this enzyme, suddenly they regain their ability to crawl to food, right? So we've reversed these Alzheimer-like features in these worms. So this is very interesting, right? Because you have one enzyme. In brain tumors, you want to inactivate it because it allows the tumor cells to survive. But in Alzheimer's disease, you also want to inactivate it, but the reason is different, because in Alzheimer's disease, you want to block it because it kills the cells. So in one situation, it lets the cells survive, and the other, it kills the cells. So you have two reasons, completely different, for wanting to target this protein. And so that's exactly what we're doing, right? So, like I said, out-of-the-box stuff, no one would ever fund a guy to do cancer research and Alzheimer's disease research, in the same kind of milieu. It would never happen. But your hard work, Canadian Cancer Society, putting this together has allowed us to do that. So thank you very much again for your
Well, that's very cool. I'm a science geek, so that's fantastic. I love it.